when younger people, teenagers or younger people in college, have those experiences where all of a sudden their ability to see in the past or see in the future that there's ever going to be any hope or any difference. That's part of the direness of the situation, and why, though we may look at it as your problems, are limited or trivial or whatever, that's why it's such a grave, serious situation to take mental health and to take that emotional development seriously.
Hi, my name is Lance, and this is UNSILENT, a speak series by NoStigmas that champions mental health advocacy and challenges stigmas that all too often prevent people from getting the help they need. We're so happy you're here. And in today's second part of our three-part conversation, we get to know more about Danielle's coping strategies and how she manages her own mental health. And she also shares a little bit about what she thinks it takes for us to be our best advocates for others, especially the youth in our lives. And she also shares the importance of seeking out network and connecting with others. Be sure to check out part one of our three-part conversation to get to know more about Danielle and her story. We're so thankful to Danielle for sharing her story with us and being so honest and open and vulnerable. Thank you again for being with us, and remember, to break these stigmas, we must be unsilent. Let's dive in. Today's episode contains in-depth conversations around suicide, suicidal ideation, and suicide loss. It's okay if you need to skip this one. Do what's right for you.
I have realized, like I said, that this is a series of losses and a huge undertaking of my ultimate question of how do I deal with intergenerational trauma and loss. So there's not one set thing, and I'm still working on it, of course. But I will say that there are a few things that have been very helpful for me. EMDR therapy was one that was very helpful to me. I have done psychotherapy, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy before, but EMDR helped me to address that our trauma and our experiences get stored within the body. So it was a way of therapy to help release trauma from the body that I found incredibly difficult to explain, very humbling for an English person who's a wordsmith, but it was life changing for me. I've I have sought out ways to take better care of my gut health because I did experience PTSD and heightened levels of cortisol. I tried to reset my body and take better care of my microbiome, of my gut health, of trying to attend to healing a vagus nerve. I started to learn about the fact that your gut is actually called your second brain, and there's a lot of reasons why we call it. I have a gut feeling, so I started to take better care of my microbiome, of my gut health, which really influences your mood and your anxiety, your mental health in that regard. I practice hot yoga, and I've learned that cardiovascular exercise with the release of endorphins is also something really, really important for me to tend to my mental health. And I recently have discovered biofield tuning, which is something that has been very interesting, but it is some energy healing that acknowledges that our bodies are electric, biomagnetic electric beings. And that's something, as well as I journal a lot. I write through my experiences as someone who is an English professor and a cultural rhetorician and believes in stories and lived embodied experiences, and the ways that sharing those, hearing those, telling those, holding space for those can be tremendously healing. Those are some of the things that I have done. I have sought out support groups. I didn't really find that it was a place for me, although I think that's wonderful for people who need that. Community and emotional support has been invaluable in my journey. I think that I have read a lot of books about epigenetics, about emotional inheritance, intergenerational trauma, as well as grief and loss, because I had so many all at once. And I sought out other people's stories, and I didn't necessarily find anybody who had two suicides within the immediate family. And that was part of my reason to want to talk about and share my own story, but also to try to build connections and learn from people's experiences of grief and loss and how they coped and managed have all been very, very important parts of my journey. And I really believe that some of the ways in which I was being directed and, surrendering, just I need help, I need healing, I'm putting my story out there, I'm seeking out support of who can share their insights and their experiences of how they've coped with their loss. I'm very, very thankful for technology and online spaces that that offer that kind of support and that kind of information, because I contrast that to the family members of mine who, I even have an aunt who had completed suicide, who I think so often how with smartphones, with the internet, we have such a wealth of both information and community support at our fingertips. And I certainly am incredibly thankful for that. And I've made use of that in my journey over the last couple of years. I grew up, and my family is from a very, very rural, small, very rural area. And I would say that in many ways, a good 10 to 20 years behind the times, and certainly psychiatric care, mental health help in such a remote area is very, very limited. And that, we're a big country. There's a lot of rural areas that affects a greater portion of the American population than maybe we, think about or address as often as we need to. As horrendous as COVID has been, all of the deaths and all of the grief and trauma of the pandemic, perhaps one of the better areas is that with the reflection of the numbers in our statistics, with depression, with alcohol abuse, with all of the things, we've started to realize how important mental health is. I was startled but slightly relieved when I read that, the pediatric association was declaring it a national health public health crisis, that we need to start paying attention to people's mental health. So while that's scary, I think that can be a really important moment for us to further our journey in destigmatizing mental health, because there's a lot of really great things that have happened, but there's also a lot of ways in which we still have a lot to we have a long ways to go. We have a lot to think about in how we still differentiate some sort of physical condition from some sort of mental health condition without realizing that they are one and of the same. So I think grappling with that and further seeking to further educate ourselves on why that is the case, why physiologically a mental condition, a mental illness is going to affect a person's body as a physical condition. Those trainings, that awareness, that advocacy is really, really important for working to continue to destigmatize the issue of mental health as some sort of a lesser or some sort of serious, a character flaw, a weakness. We have so much scientific research to back up that is just not the case. There are so many areas, even what I mentioned with like the gut health, ways in which we now understand that our bodies cannot be relegated to specific organs, and mental health conditions, mental illnesses do not just exist within the brain. They are part of the body at large. And until we understand that and approach that in this very connected, we are, this is a serious situation, and take that to heart. I think that educating ourselves on that and advocating for that is a really, really important thing, because until we do that work and have more of that mindset in our collective cultural framework, we're going to be continuously limited with the mindset that this is not a physical condition. This is something you ought to be able to do something about. I think that's important, holding that space. I think in terms of both that training, but I think that teachers and counselors are they're trying and they're doing some really important work. They're certainly, they have their hands full with still dealing with COVID, with all of the things of being underpaid and overworked. So I certainly don't want to add more to their plate. But I do think that educators, in a general, they don't have to be counselors or therapists, but recognizing that your students are whole beings and that they are also grappling with mental health and perhaps mental illness. I think sometimes we again, we'll compare our experiences, we'll see them as immature or know-it-alls, or have the situations where we think their mental wellness or their mental health episodes are not as serious or as grave as adult concerns. And I think that that can be dangerous way to approach the situation. And I think we see the repercussions of that when, tragically teenagers will, complete suicide after being bullied, or college students will complete suicide after not being able to live up to some sort of standard that they want with their grades or with their performance in a sport. And I think recognizing that to treat people and what they are enduring, their life stuff is important. I think it's a good idea to in whatever way to address mental health and the potential of mental health episodes, mental illness with your students, and make sure that even though the onus should not be entirely on the educator, we can do things like refer them to counseling centers, to suicide prevention lines, to show that we're holding space, that those things are important, to treat them as whole beings rather than just empty vessels in our classroom that we're imparting our knowledge onto, and that our class is the most important. And I'm not a parent, but certainly just holding space for mental health and mental wellness um, is a really important thing that we can do as leaders and adults and mentors and parents and teachers. My mother was an educator, and she had struggled with, as I said, depression, anxiety, PTSD, and severe insomnia for many years. And one of the things she used to say to colleagues and her friends who had children who were undergoing these mental health crises was they also don't have a lot of life experience to recognize that when they're in such a dire state, it's ever going to be any different. And I don't fault students for that. I don't fault younger people. I was one of those younger people who was holding on to her words, like a fine thread. But it is so true. Part of what is so dangerous and insidious, so scary about a mental health episode, severe depression, is that you have no grasp that you're ever going to feel differently. And that is a very, very scary place to be in mentally. I've experienced that within the last few years, and I had an additional 15 years of experience having lived through those times to recognize that I'm not always going to feel this way. But when younger people, teenagers or younger people in college, have those experiences where all of a sudden their ability to see in the past or see in the future that there's ever going to be any hope or any difference, that's part of the direness of the situation, and why, though we may look at it as your problems are limited or trivial or whatever, that's why it's such a grave, serious situation to take mental health and to take that emotional development seriously. I'll also say that a lot of people, even teenagers and young adults, are very good at hiding the pain. They're very good at hiding their severe depression, their suicide ideation, their suicide tendencies. It's not always the person who appears most in need of mental health help and support. And addressing that stereotype, and I think, is another important thing that those educated should address.
We say thank you again to Danielle for sharing her story with us and being so open and honest and vulnerable. And to go beyond the show, you can always connect with us at NoStigmas on all social media platforms and at NoStigmas.org. Thank you again so much for joining us today. And remember, be unsilent. We'll see you next time.